Being the best debater means having your partner be worse than you.
By definition.
And it means having your teammates be worse than you.
By definition.
Yeah. Because you can't be the best and still have people who are better than you. And in some ways, it's like a double-edged sword. It's great to be the best because if you were doing debate to be successful or to be recognized as successful or for like ego reasons, then like sweet, you're the best on your team, right? Or maybe you're the best in your state or something to that effect. But in formats like parliamentary debate, public forum, and policy, where you are inevitably going to have a partner, the sort of battle I see people come up with again and again, and especially as a coach now, and I saw this as a competitor as well, is people who are upset or who have bad mentalities because their partner is worse than them. And what I mean by that is people who don't know how to carry.
Yeah, and carry's seen as like a very negative thing, or that like, you know, like it sucks that I have to carry. But the point is that if you are trying to improve, you can start out with that being really easy, because it's really easy for your sort of average experience and skill level coach to give you really useful advice. It's easy for you to look to your teammates, see what they're doing, and then copy that or get feedback from them and learn and do it. But then once you accomplish those things, all of a sudden it's not as easy for you to improve. And I think people get pretty discouraged by that, or at least, for lack of a better term, really whiny about it. I coach at a community college, meaning we have our students for 2 years. And oftentimes what happens is that someone is coming back in the fall, but their debate partner isn't, or they're the most experienced person on the team, and they always have this sort of like freak out moment of like, this time of year they're like, what do I do in the fall? Who's going to be my debate partner? And I always have to tell them like, I don't know. They're not signed up yet. They'll sign up. We'll see who joins. We'll ask any of them if they want to just dive right in and go into open and trial by fire. And I think that's like scary to them, and they also don't, I think part of it is maybe not having a confidence in being able to win. But the point is that wasn't even like that amazing a debater, but I'm confident that I could do pretty much as well as I did with any partner, as long as they listened, were productive, or, you know, it's once you know what you're doing, it's not that hard. Once you understand the whole debate and what's happening in there, it's not that hard for you to have a debate that isn't, or a partner that isn't that experienced or doesn't really understand debate as well, especially since you see that at like the national championship level.
And I think that partner dynamics in general are pretty important to talk about, because like people assume that having the two ideal worlds, or I guess let's go three, right? The three best case scenarios for everyone that they imagine is, I get a partner who's just insane, who's just so good. They're just way better than me. I get a partner who's exactly as good as me, which is impossible. It's not. That's just not a thing. It doesn't make any sense. Or I get a partner who's a little bit worse than me. Yeah. Right? Because anything other than that, and people are dissatisfied, right? Yeah. But I've been in those scenarios, less so the middle one, because like I said, it's pretty much impossible. And it's not what people think, right? Like, because, so my partner, junior and senior year, Dallas, was excellent, love her. I hope she's doing well. She's great. Yeah. Same. Oh, same. Okay.
No.
No. But anyway, moving on. Dallas junior year, way better than me. I mean, just so much better than me that like I like petitioned her to be my partner and whatnot. And we ended up having a great, successful partnership for a long time, and it was awesome. And there were a lot of problems throughout it at points, and most of those problems actually came when I got closer to her skill level, though I would say I never actually reached her skill level. She was just really good. But here's the thing. What that meant for me junior year was every single person telling me, like, well, you get carried, you know what I mean? Or like, you're just the backpack. Like, Dallas could do that with anyone. And like, I don't necessarily disagree. I think she was really good. Yeah. But that's hard for people. It's really hard to be the second best person on a good team, and especially when there's a perceived massive skill gap where everyone kind of thinks you're trash, right? And you just have to deal with it. And then when it comes to the point where you're on the other end of the spectrum, where you're the one who has to carry someone, which was actually most of my career, other than when I was
at DVC, your second year for sure.
Yeah, other than when I was with Dallas, that's also very difficult because, and I see this with my students now, and a lot of people really, it's just like complaining, right? Where it's like, oh, well, this person's not good enough, or like if they had just done this better, then everything would have been fine, and blah 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 blah. Like, and sometimes it becomes like, well, why aren't you coaching them better so that they can be as good as me? Which isn't really how it works, but I've had this problem with students where it's not even that their partner is worse than them, but it is, and I think this applies just writ large, competitors, while they're still in it, are terrible at evaluating how good someone is, or more importantly, what their skill potential is. Mm-hmm. And that happened big time this year at one of the institutions that I work with, right? Where we had our student who's probably like our second or, well, nah, definitely not second. They're our third or fourth best competitor. And we did all the partnership things, right? We're like, okay, you're going to be with you, you're going to be with you. And we put our two best competitors together who have known each other for a long time, and they did excellent. But this student right away was like, I'm not actually too happy with my partnership because I feel like you put me with someone who's like not that good, and I would have preferred this, and I feel like these other people got put together. And we tried to tell them, like, we hear you, but we actually think this person is going to be better long term, or like this person has this skill set, and they just weren't feeling it, so we changed their partnership again, and they did all right. But then the thing is, the person who they thought was way worse than them got a partner who was definitely not as good as this previous person, right? Nowhere near as experienced, and at the end of the year did exactly as good as that other person did with their new partner who they thought was better, right?
Yeah.
So like, a lot of it is about potential, and just people are terrible at evaluating how good someone can be. And like, part of potential for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is role playing, because teams aren't like in any sport or competitive discipline, like just putting the two best people together almost never works. It's just not how you need someone who can play a different role, a more supportive role, or like just do different things that the other person can't do. And I wanted to hear kind of what you think on that subject.
How you make good partnerships?
Yeah, how you make good partnerships.
Yeah, so that's definitely a skill you develop as a coach, and you can definitely tell when you've done it wrong, and then you can also tell when people are just being babies about it. But jumping back slightly, one thing I'll say is that you have to have the mindset that, I mean, it's been proven, it's been shown, you can be good enough that with a terrible but well-meaning partner, you can have any level of success you want. So, I think blaming your partner's skill level for your lack of success is always an excuse. Because even if it's true and they're not good at debate, you can always get good enough that alone you're able to carry the team to whatever success you want. And I think a lot of people who complain about their partner's skill levels aren't taking on that responsibility, where it's like, well, I'm just going to have to be good enough that I can do all of my job and like half of their job, which happens. And once people sort of accept that, they sort of rise to the challenge very quickly. But how do I determine good partnerships? Honestly, a huge part of it's just schedule. Like, the way our team works, it's not really at DVC, it's not the best setup, but we have 4 individual meeting days with like different people showing up different days. And some people can come to all 4, some people can come to 3. But the idea is that if you're not able to meet with this person often enough, it's just not gonna work out. It's just not a good partnership. After that, it's like tournament availability. Are you available for the same tournaments? Are you trying to go to the same tournaments? Like, at the very least, you want to be on the same schedule as someone, because good partnerships take more time than anything else. And you thinking that something else comes before that is always going to not work out. If you think, like, this person will be a really good partner, but I just don't have the time to work with them, it almost never works out. That's why you rarely see hybrid partnerships do well. And when you do see it, I imagine that they've made specific time to work together, like in a significant way, or they were friends from before, they were on another team together, now they're on 2 different teams, and now they're hybrids. But very rarely, like, if hybrids are allowed, why doesn't the best person from this school just team up with the best person from the other school and dominate? Because it rarely works out that well. So the first thing is just schedule and availability. After that, it just becomes a matter of being able to go through negative experiences with them. And that's what makes partnerships fall apart. Because on our team, we call it the van test. And the van test is us deciding whether we want you to be on the travel team. And it comes down to, when we're deciding whether we're taking you to state champs or not, it doesn't matter how good you are. Because we got second place at state, right? Like, worst case scenario, without one kid, we get third. Like, boo-hoo, right? So no one kid is important enough to determine, like, how our team... And no one's bigger than the team. So at that point, the question of who we take to state first and foremost becomes, can you pass the van test? Which is, if we're going to spend 6 hours in a van, am I going to be able to sit next to you? Are you obnoxious? Are you annoying? Are you rude? Are you mean? Those things take precedence over your skill level always. And then after that, once we know you can pass the van test, yeah, you're in based on merit and skill and hard work and things like that. And what I will say is that I would put it in the following orders. First, availability. After that is like an attitude in terms of like, what's it like to do poorly with this person? My first debate partner was really toxic, and every time we lost a round, she'd blame it on me. I did novice for like 4 or 5 tournaments. I joined in the spring, so my first semester we went to 4 or 5 tournaments, novice, didn't break it a single one. And every time I'd ask the judge, like, anything I can work on? And they're like, not really. Just lost because of this other thing. And then we'd walk out of the room and my partner would be like, here's what I think you need to do next time. It's like, I'm not sure how that's what you got out of it, but okay. Yeah. And then, like, that same year I did a one-on-one debate event at state and got, like, silver in open. So pretty clearly I was not the issue. But so it's that, right? Like, when you do poorly, do you do poorly together, or do you guys turn on each other? And if you are the person that turns on your partner, yikes. After that, I would say it's hard work. I would take the person who is willing to, like, face their shortcomings and be like, well, I'm just going to do drills and try to get better and whatever. That person will always outperform the naturally gifted one in the long run, because the naturally gifted people tend to not take failure very well, and they see it as a, like, negative reflection of themselves, and it makes them doubt everything they are, and they go into a crisis mode, and then they decide debate's bullshit and they don't want to do it. The people who start out not doing well not only don't take it personally when they have shortcomings, but by the time they hit failures at a higher level and later on in their careers, they already have a perception of how easily they can improve through hard work, so it's not a big deal to them. Lastly, after all of those things, I'd say, like, a match in style and, like, you know, like, them being skilled or whatever. But I would put all 3 of those things before I put skill level, because if I have a whole year to work with this person, by the time those big tournaments come around at the end, you'll have gotten to a better partnership than starting with someone purely because of their skill level or whatever and having none of the other things line up.
I think that the one thing not in there that's important to note is that a partnership is just a relationship, right? Like, it's agreeing to work with someone, right? And in debate, because you spend so much time together and you go through sort of the trenches, and tournaments are hard. Like, college is a little bit different than high school, because, like, at a college tournament, you might show up at, like, 8 a.m. and be there till 10 p.m.
Show up at 8 a.m.
The
first round's at 8 a.m.
Yeah, and do that for 3 days. And, like, they're like, oh, we're going to have light fare, which means there's going to be bagels maybe and some cuties, or, like, the oranges,
and the
right?
tournament always runs late, and lunch is the first thing to get cut.
Yeah, lunch is the first thing, you know, all those things, right? And, like, they really, like, and I'm sure tournaments try their hardest, right? But tournaments are hard to run. I'll say that, right? I don't blame really tournaments for this, right? Now, there's some tournaments who do an excellent job. Honestly, I'm just I think Phil Sharp at UNR runs one of the best tournaments in the nation in terms of just like making sure like student wellness is important and like.
Yeah, but even then he's grumpy the whole time.
Yeah,
like it's just not an easy thing to run.
It's hard. It's super hard to run a tournament. But what I was getting at is that these things are fundamentally about relationships, right? And relationships are going to have hard times, but in any relationship, right? Like, not to give you dating advice or whatever.
But it
like,
kind of is.
There's like, I think the most important thing in all the relationships I've had is drawing a line. Like, I think you have to have a line where you say, I am willing to do this and be a part of this relationship to this point, right? And that can mean a lot of different things in like a romantic relationship, but in debate, like, for me, what that looked like was I told Dallas, like, up front, I said, I literally will do whatever you want in terms of, like, learning about debate. I'll do the drills you want me to do. And if we lose a round, I'll take the blame. Like, it'll be my fault, whatever, right? Because, for me, it's like being with her who was that good and who I thought I could learn a lot from and did learn a lot from was worth it. Like, it was worth being told that I was bad at debate, not by her, but by the community or whatever, and that, like, oh, you know, she just carries me, or that it was my fault, because it usually was, right? Because I was worse. And, like, that changed over time to the point where, like, you know, it was more even keel, and, like, we both were more accountable to things. But I think vice versa, like, you have to make that decision, right? Like, it was possible for someone in Dallas's position to be like, okay, well, if I'm going to be the one who is better and who's going to get the support part of it, so to speak, right? Like the other person's going to tee me up to do what I want and blah, 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 blah. Then that means if we lose, it's on me, right? Like those are different mindsets. And Dallas took rounds very hard either way, right? It wasn't like, even though other people might have said like it was my fault, Dallas always felt like she could have done more. But with that said, like, those are decisions you have to make, right? Like, it was hard at times to be, like, yelled at by people or to be told I was trash or to hear that or to know people are saying things in the community or whatever. But, like, I thought it was worth it because I wanted to win. And, like, I cared more about that. And me and Dallas were also really good friends, so, like, that made it a little bit easier. But, like, if you're going to be the best and then be mad that, like, your partner sucks, like, make your partner better then, dude. Because either that or quit. Because it's either worth it or it's not worth it, right? You're not guaranteed to get the best person, and having the best person wouldn't guarantee you success, and there's no guarantee you'd work with them. Like, your ability to work with people matters, and the only way to determine whether a debate partnership or a relationship is going to work out is to say, I'm going to stick with it to this point, and if it stops being worth it, I'm going to stop doing it. And that's how debate should be for you too, right? If it stops being worth it, if it stops being fun, if you're not getting your discipline or whatever out of it, stop doing it. Because it might not be for you.
Yeah, I got one thing on that and then one thing on the next thing. This is for every relationship in general, but it also, you know, applies to debate. And it's that people tend to put their best attributes forward. They're like the only people who like are really shitty people until you really get to know them are like Wolverine and like, I don't know, alcoholic people in crust punk bands. Like, I'm just like, yeah, I know he seems like a piece of shit, but then once you really get to know him, you find out he has a heart of gold. Most people who are somewhat put together tend to only get worse the more you know them. Right?
Our old coach and former mayor of our town, John Hancock, told me one morning, the first time I ever went to Pacific's tournament, and I saw him and I'm like, John, you're always so happy in the morning. I'm shocked. Like, you just seem so energetic. And he goes, well, you know, a lot of people wake up, Paul, in the morning and they're dicks. And they say, well, I'm not a morning person. But in my experience, they're just dicks.
Yeah, but the point is that, like, the better someone gets to know you, the more they're probably going to see bad things about you. And I think people tend to, like, underplan for that, right? Like, think about, like, you having a debate partnership, everything that makes you bad at debate. And everybody has things that makes them good at debate and things that makes them bad at debate. But everything that makes you bad at debate is something that this person is going to eventually notice and eventually going to come to know, right? And the healthy outlook that you should have on it is you start to, like, plan for that and be open about it, you know, and just be like, look, like, I get really self-conscious when we lose and blah, blah, blah. and here's how I feel about that. And you don't have to talk about that day one, but I think when you feel it happening, like, be honest and just talk about where you're coming from and why that's happening. Because otherwise, like, if you're just trying to, like, maintain this illusion that there's, like, nothing bad about you as a debater, then what you inevitably do is you turn on your partner and start blaming them for your shortcomings or for, like, why you guys lost or why you're acting that way, and then becomes really toxic, and then you just have a really shitty partnership. And basically the main takeaway from this is the way you have a good debate partner is you just find someone who has similar goals, is willing to work as hard as you are, and then you just try to make that work as a relationship and as a partnership rather than as some magical thing to do with debate. The thing that I'd like to go into now, which I think is also related to this, is as you get better, you will inevitably become the best person on your team, right? And you start to outgrow the coaching that you're receiving. And not everyone can just, like, hop up into another layer of coach or just hop into a new team and have, like, now I have better teammates and stuff like that. So what do you do when you are a better debater than your coach or than the rest of your teammates? How do you keep practicing and improving at that point?
So I think that so that was probably the case for me and Dallas junior and senior year, right? And more clearly senior year. And I think that first and foremost, I will say that I oftentimes think that's a good thing if your teammates who are, like, worse than you or your B or C team, whatever you want to call them, right, are driven, right? Mm-hmm. Because we had a lot of really competitive people at Pacific at the same time, right? Like, and everyone wanted to be good, and, like, people did not want me and Dallas. Well, I mean, first off, they supported us, but, like, they didn't want us to be the best because they wanted to be the best, right? And so people took practice fairly seriously, and at times that still didn't matter because the skill difference was just too much, right? That, like, we could. Here's a big thing I can say for people that's going to go into this topic. You're not trying to win in practice, or you shouldn't be. Or it's not practice. If you're trying to win in practice, something has gone wrong. Like, you should want to win, but your goal for practice should not be to win the debate. It should be to get better at debate, right? Yeah. And when your team start being competitive, that gets harder and harder because you start being like, well, no, I'm going to beat you, right? And, like, we won that round, and, like, the trash talking starts and stuff. And I think that's fun. I like a trash talk, and so it never really bothered me, right? But we had a lot of interpersonal issues across the team the last 2 years because of those differences of people who all wanted to be the best but weren't going to be. And with that said, what that came down to for me and Dallas towards the end there was, like, we started talking and we're like, look, we're not getting the practice we need because, like, our coaches, first off, they can't give, like, and I love all my coaches. I ended up working for one of them now. I coach at the school that I used to compete at because I loved my coach so much. Shout out to Steve. But Steve can't give all his time to us. And Steve's never been like, he's never been like, well, the A team gets to go here and, like, do all this practice. He's like, no, I have to coach my team. Coaching. Yeah, it's not good to do that, right? Yeah. And so we couldn't get specialized attention. And, like, a lot of the time, it's hard to give feedback beyond, like, well, yeah, that was pretty good. And, like, I've known this as a coach, like, if you have one team that's just way better than the other team, but they're practicing against each other, of course this team's going to stomp them. And so, like, how much feedback can you give them in the context of that round, right? That's the hardest part of coaching in a lot of ways, right? So you have to look for different things. But with that said, what that means for you as the A team is you have to start making decisions about what you're going to practice. And that's what me and Dallas did. We would just go into, like, not the day before, like, an hour or whatever before practice. We'd sit down and we'd talk, and we'd be like, what are we going to work on today? Like, let's try and win by only going for things that are answered. Let's try and win by going for more defense, which I loved. Offense. Let's go for T today. Let's not go for T today. Let's practice the critique. Let's, like, intentionally concede arguments that make it harder for us to do this. Let's go for this in the PMR, even though it's harder. Because, like, our junior year, we really hadn't figured that out. And, like, basically, if we were negative, we're like, we're just going to beat them on T, or we're going to beat them on the K, and, like, we're going to do that, like, every single round. It's not going to be a problem. But eventually, we're like, we're going to have dissent debates. It's not going to work against other people who are better at those things. And I think that's the big secret if you're sort of the A team, is, like, decide, like, make it harder for yourself. You can always do this.
Think of it as, like, weighted training.
Exactly, yeah, right?
So the idea is that, like, if, you know, Paul and I are practicing, I don't know, Master Roshi's Turtle Hermit style of martial arts or whatever, and I'm improving, and the only way we have to practice is practicing on each other, and I'm way better than him, then we could both stop improving, or I could stop improving. Or what I could do is I could use like ways of restraining myself, like making myself heavier, making myself slower, making myself harder to succeed, and then still trying to compete so that he has a shot, so it's competitive for him and he gets the motivation. But also, from my perspective, I'm like making the debate harder for myself so that when I'm in an actual round, it feels like you're taking off the, weighted gear like Rock Lee style. And yeah, that's definitely the way to go about it. So try to like identify what you need to work on and try to like not use your biggest strengths, and then that will go.
I want to hit that especially, right? I think in general in debate you should cultivate your strengths, because your strengths are what's going to get you to the championship, right?
Yeah.
Of the deep elims of tournaments, right? You want teams to be thinking in their prep room. Well, this is a partly specific thing, right? But whatever, when they PF, they know you, whatever.
Sure.
You want teams to be thinking, dude, how are we going to beat them if they read the critique? How are we going to beat them if they read this theory? Like, what do we do if they do this? Like, it's just you want to be in their head, so to speak, and whatnot. And that only happens through strengths. But when you're the A team, you have already cultivated your strengths likely to the degree that you need to. And the time to cultivate those strengths further is probably like drill work or like focus work that you do by yourself, right? Cultivate your weaknesses when you're debating against these teams that are worse than you, right? Do what's harder, right? Yeah. Take the path of most resistance, I think, in these areas. And are you good on strength six? There's one thing I wanted to move on to that I think is important.
Well, the only thing that I was going to add to that is that whenever you're good at something and you want feedback or figure out how to improve, the feedback that you are looking for is not instructions on how to get better, because the people you're asking don't know how to make you better. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the feedback. What it means is you should ask them what they think, how they feel, and then determine whether that's the outcome you wanted and try to figure out how to get the outcome you wanted. But you always have to be like testing your whatever you're doing, right? Testing it in front of people and seeing if you're getting the response that you want, and then you can figure out how to solve the problem. So they dictate to you what the problems are, and then you figure out how to solve it rather than... And that's huge advice for getting useful feedback out of judges that aren't super experienced, right? Instead of having them tell you what you need to do better next time, just find out why they voted against you. And if you can get an honest, accurate answer for why they voted against you, you can figure out how to avoid that in the future. And that'll be much more useful to you than the feedback that you get about like them telling you like, here's this drill I think you should do, or here's what I think you should have said, because they don't really know. They're not very good debaters, probably. What's the thing you wanted to move on to?
It's two parts. The first part is people imagine that debate and other skills are like there's 5 tomes, and like you go from tome 1, and once you've mastered tome 1, you go to tome 2 and tome 3. Like, they think that it's a linear progression of what makes a good debater, right? So if this debater learned T, then they learn their critique, then they learn, and blah, 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 until they're at the top, right? And what that means is that when they see a good debater, they think, well, they know all of these things. Yeah. Or if they're better than me in all of these things, right? Even if you're a one-trick pony who's only focused on one thing. Yeah. But it's not like that. Debate is there are 50 tomes, and it's impossible to be the best at all of them, or to have even learned all of them. Mm-hmm. And so how someone gets to mastery is completely different from person to person, right?
Yeah, it's usually a combination. You figure out what combination you like and what that answers and whether that works.
And so what that means, which is sort of my greater point in that second thing, is... if you're not trying to make your teammates better, you're trash, as far as I'm concerned. You have an incentive to make sure your teammates are as good as they can be so that you get the best practice possible, right? If you see that your teammate, like, if you know, wow, my teammate really sucks at answering topicality, and so I can just beat him on topicality every day and I can phone in practice as a result, why are you wasting your time? You should want that person to put up the most resistance possible. You should want practice to be so hard that when you show up to a tournament, you're like, oh, wow, this is way easier than hitting our other team, right? Like, that really should be the goal. And that's why, like, these teams where they're, like, 3 deep and they're in the top 15 in the nation, like all 3 of those teams, are just so devastating because almost none of them have the same style of debater, the same wheelhouse, but they've all cultivated each other's strength and worked together just to be like a force that like even their C team can beat your A team on the right day if they're debating in their wheelhouse, right? You need to try to make your teams better, right? And especially if you want to be perceived as the best, because I'm telling you, like, if you're not the actual best debater, if you're the second best debater on your team, but you're the one who's gone out of their way to make sure their teammates are successful, like, people will remember that, and that will make a big difference, right? Like, I don't want to, like, this isn't like a toot your own horn thing or whatever, but my senior year, like, we won a lot of trophies in debate. It was great. I love that. But one of my favorite awards ever was I won Peer Coach of the Year, or Student like Peer Coach of the Year, which just means, like, person who's still competing but helps coach for our region, for the NCFA. And the reason that's so important to me is because it's like, look, we had a lot of competitive success and that was great. But to be recognized by my peers as like, and you went out of your way to help other people be better, and to know, like really know that, like, if I'll shout out Dominic. Dominic's one of our best competitors now. He's still going to be debating next year. He's one of my really dear friends in the community and everything. I spent so much time talking to Dominic because Dominic wanted to learn stuff. And I'm sure I taught Dominic a lot, but he taught me a ton about debate from just working with him and just from him getting better. And because no matter who his partner was, Dom was like, no, fuck that. I want to be as good as Dallas and Paul. And so I'm going to give them the hardest rounds I possibly can. And like his style now is so different than either Dallas' style or my style. But that's because he was like, how would I beat Dallas and Paul? And like, it's really great to see now. And it's just like, you will care so much more about that long term. Because like we've said before, you're probably not going to win a national championship, but if your teammate does someday, you're still going to be like stoked about it, right? You want to be that kind of person.
Part of the reason we even have this academy is because people in high school just don't do this as far as we can tell. Like our college region starts off the season with a free camp for people in the area. It's a one-day thing. And you go and other coaches from the region teach you stuff, and there's like, here's your intro to debate, here's your whatever, but there's also like speech stuff, and there's straight up our director, Robert Hawkins, one of the best interp coaches in the nation, gave a lecture on how to write a POI, and then like, here's straight up how I write a POI, like all of those like championship POIs or whatever that like I wrote, that I write for my kids, whatever, here's literally how you do that. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to dominate our region. Because when we do that, the only way we can improve is to drive to Southern California, and that's exhausting and expensive, and I don't want to get stuck in snow on the Grapevine again. It took me 10 and a half hours to drive. I don't want to do that. What I want is to be in the region that is really strong, right? And if I have one thing that is making like one secret that is making me really competitive in my region, I want the region to know that, and I want them to do that so that that secret isn't going to be enough for me to succeed in that area anymore, so that I have to learn and get better, because probably that one thing isn't enough to carry you through like significant success in nationals. And that's why like national championship tournaments are dominated by certain regions, right? It's not like an equal representation of the best teams from each region represent the equal whatever. Like it's like a region has the best competition, so the fourth best team from that region is probably the 8th best team in the whole nation.
Yeah. This year at the NPT, first off, the NCFA, the region we're from, no one in the nation I think would say it's like really competitive or anything. No. 3 of the top 5 teams at the NPTE this year came from our region. Yeah. The number 1, number 3, and number 5 team all came. Mm-hmm. Maybe 6. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they're 5. All came from the region. And so it's like, that's good. It's good to see those people all the time at tournaments and to get better. And, you know, Texas, every year, Texas is really good. Kansas was really good. Like, there's just certain, conglomerates or whatever that form because of it.
In community college, that's Southern California. I mean...
OCC.
Yeah, I mean, OCC, Elko. Moorpark, Mount Sac, Elko. Like, at our state championship, for, like, the last 10 years, you would see a Northern California team crack the top 10, like, 7 times in 10 years. And, like, that's not
Good.
Good. Like, they would call their Southern fucking assholes. But they're right.
What?
They would call their Southern California championships state. Because, yeah, I mean, you pretty much the only... Because then it gets easier, right? If your region is the strongest region, it's the same reason why, in a lot of ways, our state championships harder than nationals. Because at your state championships, every team is from California, and California is a powerhouse when it comes to forensics, especially at the community college.
Illinois, though. That Illinois come up for whatever.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, then when you go to nationals, it's a little easier because you just increase your chances of not hitting California teams. Like, that's what you want. You want to be in a super strong region where you're constantly hitting the hardest teams, so then when you go to nationals, it's just sort of like high fives all around because you're all in the top 5. That applies to your team, that applies to your region. Like, you want to try to bring everyone up, because if you have a fragile ego about, like, needing to feel dominant on that small a scale, you're never going to be dominant on a very wide scale.
For me, all of that is to say that it is great to want to be the best, and it is not that great to be the best if you're the only one who's good, which means that whether it's you being the best person in a partnership or you being the best team at your school or in your region or whatever, right? And it's like you view that as a burden. Instead, you need to view that as a call to action for you to try to make other people better so that you can get better practice, right?
Yeah.
If you genuinely believe that the only way for you to be better is for you to hit these really competitive teams, then that's what you should want to do.